Hey everyone, I'm Natalie Ivey, and in today's show, I'm going to share 3 case examples of botched investigations and my top 5 prevention strategies so you avoid botching a case. This is a great episode to help you mitigate the risks of making expensive mistakes, especially when investigating serious allegations of employee misconduct. I look forward to having you join me.
Welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivey, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
As HR professionals, look, we're expected to be fair, aren't we? Objective and thorough when conducting investigations. But the truth is, sometimes investigators get it wrong. Could be skipping critical steps, allowing personal biases to creep in, or just not documenting properly. Look, mistakes in the investigation process, it can really cost organizations dearly, and not just financially, but also in the corporate reputation, employee morale, and employee trust. All right, in this episode, I'm going to break down 3 real-world examples of investigation failures and diagnose what went wrong, why it mattered, and what you can do differently. Let's dig in. Now, first, let's talk, though, about why investigations fail. Well, from my vantage point, and for those of you who have listened to my podcast for a while, you know I'm a licensed investigator, and I work with organizations all the time. And even before I started my company 23 years ago, I conducted investigations for inside corporations, everything from sexual harassment to workers' comp fraud and everything in between. Look, most missteps don't really come from bad intentions. They come from a lack of training, time pressure, and assumptions really about what an investigation really entails. Some people think, well, I talked to the person who complained and I talked to the employee that they're accusing of the wrongdoing. Oh, boom, we're done. No, okay, an investigation isn't just a he said, she said kind of exchange. It is a structured process. You've got rules, you've got documentation, you've got to do your due diligence. And for some of you, you may even have a union and you have collective bargaining agreements that you're going to have to also comply with and make sure that your procedures are aligned with that. All right. When shortcuts are taken and the neutrality is compromised, or maybe the investigator isn't trained properly, things really fall apart. Let's take a look at our first example. All right, in case study number 1 here, the accused was never interviewed. In this case example, an employee, let's call her Bridget, not her real name, but she filed a complaint alleging that her supervisor was making inappropriate jokes and sending unwanted texts. HR got involved, responded quickly, and then interviewed the complainant, Bridget, a few of her coworkers, and even checked some of the text messages. The HR manager then concluded, okay, well, the supervisor really had behaved inappropriately and the company terminated him. Here's the problem, though. HR never interviewed the subject, the accused supervisor. That's right. They just made a decision to fire him based on Bridget's side of the story and that of her other coworkers. They didn't give him a chance to respond to the allegations. Well, what happened next? The former supervisor filed a wrongful term lawsuit. He claimed that he was just subjected to some defamation of his character. He wasn't given due process. Well, then during the discovery process, it came out that HR had intentionally skipped his interview. Why? To avoid supposedly re-traumatizing the complainant. Well, the court wasn't impressed. That company had to settle that one for 6 figures. Ouch. The lesson here, no matter how compelling an initial complainant seems, you still have to provide some procedural fairness. That means you hear all sides, you gather all relevant facts, and you got to document everything. Let's now move on to case study example number 2. This is about documentation, or really the lack of it. All right. An office manager reported to HR that an employee was stealing office supplies and supposedly reselling them online. All right. HR got involved and conducted an investigation, talked to the employee, a few team members, and checked video footage. All right. The employee was ultimately fired. Fast forward 6 months, that employee who was fired files for unemployment, challenges the termination. And during the unemployment hearing, HR had no ability to produce any of the notes from the investigation. Well, why? Well, that manager wrote everything down in her little spiral notebook that she kept in her HR office, and they had an office move and she lost it. The only thing they had was a termination letter that just said, quote, violation of company policies, end quote. No details, no interviews, no evidence. Well, the company ended up having to pay unemployment and legal fees. Plus, they had to reinstate the employee's eligibility for rehire in their system. That was uncomfortable for all parties. Okay, lesson here. You document everything and you have to store it securely. And you have to use a good investigation report template and then do it the same every time. Also back it up. Digital storage is your friend. And by the way, all of these tools are in the supplemental toolkit that's included with my new book. My second edition of my new book is out, How to Conduct Internal Investigations. So once you purchase the book, then all you need to do is produce your receipt, and then my assistant Madison will send you the supplemental toolkit. There's tons of good stuff in there, so you have no reason to not be able to work with some standardized procedures. Let's now move on to case example number 3, bias in the interview process. In this situation, an employee went to HR and alleged that a colleague was making racially insensitive remarks during team meetings. The HR business partner was assigned the case, and the problem was the HR business partner had for some time a rather friendly relationship with the employee who was accused, the one that the complainant said was making these racially insensitive remarks. The HR business partner and the accused, the subject, they both worked together at a previous company and were friends outside of work. Well, during the investigation, the HR business partner asked some leading questions like, you didn't mean that offensively, right, to the subject, right, or accused, those are interchangeable terms, with whom she had a relationship with. Also said, this isn't really something you do on purpose, is it? Wow. Complainant was only interviewed once, also wasn't given an opportunity to provide additional witnesses. Ultimately, the case was closed as unsubstantiated. Well, months later, though, another employee comes forward with similar complaints about the same individual making, guess what, racially insensitive remarks during team meetings. The pattern and the earlier bias really became so obvious. Well, the organization then had to reopen the earlier case, then assign a new investigator, and then also issue an apology to both of the employees. So what's the takeaway here? Even subtle bias can taint an investigation. It's critical that you make sure the investigator is neutral, and that means someone that's got no personal relationship or even the perception of having a conflict of interest. And everybody needs training on how to conduct investigations and also how to recognize and mitigate bias. And look, if you need help with the training part, my next workshop is coming up. I've got a 2-day virtual workshop. It's happening September 23rd and 24th from 11 to 5 Eastern Time via Zoom. And in the show notes, you'll find a link to register. All right, now, you've heard me say a few case examples of botched investigations. Let me now move on and share with you my 5 prevention strategies so you can avoid these costly and, in some cases, pretty darn damaging mistakes. Let's take a look at number 1. Always use an investigation plan. You've got to map out who you need to interview, what evidence do you need to gather, and how you'll document everything. And you got to think about your order of your witnesses, availability of your witnesses. Number 2, document every step. This goes back to templates, like I mentioned to you, the supplemental toolkit. You've got to have a process for how you're going to take your notes. You've got to have a process for how you're updating your case notes. How are you going to structure your witness summaries? How are you going to create an investigation report? What's the process and how should it be documented consistently? And then also, where is our storage digital system? Okay. Number 3, ensure neutrality. Always make sure investigators are impartial and they have no stake in the outcome. And if there's any question about it, that isn't the right investigator. Number 4, stick to facts, not feelings. Make conclusions based on what you can prove and not what you think happened. Right? And number 5, close the loop. You've got to communicate outcomes appropriately, even if it's just saying you go back to the complainant, look, this matter has been reviewed and addressed. People want to know that their complaints were really taken seriously. You don't just leave the poor complainant hanging and let 3 weeks, 4 weeks go by and then you never get back in touch with them. That's a no-no. Following these practices is certainly going to help build trust. It reduces risk. plain and simple. All right, so that's it for me today. I want to thank you very much for joining me for this episode on the HR Investigations podcast. As you can see, though, even well-meaning professionals can make really big mistakes when conducting workplace investigations, but with the right training, the right tools, awareness, you can avoid these pitfalls. If you're ready to sharpen your investigative skills, remember, check out my book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, or sign up for my upcoming 2-day virtual workshop. It's titled, guess what? How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical workshop for HR professionals. You can go to my website at rpchr.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with a colleague. Leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay compliant, always investigate with integrity, and always remember, the best investigation is the one you don't have to do. See ya.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with a case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.